Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, in the words of former Iowa basketball player Caitlin Clark and also extremely weird Indianapolis newspaper columnist Greg Doyle, Tony, I've been in some weird press conferences over the years, and I know you have too. That one was... It was a moment in time, Tony. It was a moment in time.
I purposefully have not watched that because I do not like cringe television, and I don't want to be... I didn't want to experience that, Tom, so thank you for bringing that to me, and I've seen it obviously on Twitter, and it's like, I don't want to see any of that. And I still don't, and now I feel like I have a little bit, and not thrilled about that, frankly. But yeah, I've seen the backlash. I did see that he apologized.
Did he apologize with a link to his column, Tony? Oh, you bet he did. The very best kind of apology, the most sincere kind of apology, the one that comes with advertising.
I will credit Greg Doyle, who used to be a national columnist. And then he's like, you know what? I'm just going to settle down. I'm going to stick to Indianapolis and be a city columnist. And so, credit to him. But yeah, never let a scandal go uncolumnized. Is that the correct terminology?
It feels like that's the vibe, if not the exact phrasing. But yes, that was. You never want to become the story, and you definitely don't want to become the story if the story is weirdo creeps out famous basketball player. So that's when you really don't want to be the story.
Not since Ahmad Rashad interviewed Michael Jordan at halftime have there been such uncomfortable silences between two people. Anyway, let's talk about let's segue seamlessly.
Speaking of transitions is the phrase you're looking for.
To Ohio State football. On Tuesday's show, or Wednesday's show, actually, I think it was, we talked about the stock risers on the Ohio State offense. Today, we're going to talk about the defense. Plenty of names to go through. The guys who, from, say, winter to now, had their stock rise the most through their play in the spring, through their offseason in the winter, things of that nature. So, we've got 8 names. We're going to go back and forth just like we did on Wednesday's show. And Tom, I let you go first the last time. I'm never doing that again. I'm going to go first this time. And
much like the Black Stripe draft, I got to go first, and I got to take Jeremiah Smith, and then you just got to seethe, cope harder, Tony.
Cope harder. I will cope the hardest. I'm going to go with Jermaine Mathews, who was obviously involved last year as a true freshman, got a start or two outside as a cornerback and was reliable, but we also saw times early in the season when they needed an extra cornerback. Sometimes it was Jordan Hancock. Talking with Jim Knowles this spring, if something were to happen with one of the corners, they would not move Jordan Hancock. They would just bring in Jermaine Mathews. He has solidified that spot as the number 3. But I think what also puts him up on this list is he has solidified his spot perhaps as the number 2 nickelback as well. Last year as a true freshman, Knowles didn't want him playing nickel. He just wanted him to worry about and focus on outside corner, which he did. So this spring, he's got that under control. They wanted to branch him out and play him at some nickel, which we saw and did very well, and will compete with Lorenzo Styles Jr. there to be the backup for Jordan Hancock. But I think we'll see him in some dime packages as well, Tom. And he's going to be a guy that plays quite a bit, whether it's as a third corner, a second nickel, a dime. I think we're going to see him on the field quite a bit this year.
He feels like he's almost a utility player for them in that cornerback room, in that secondary, where he can fill so many different spots, and he's the next man up in so many different spots. And how many times I feel like I'm getting tired of talking about this already, and I'm sure the listeners are like, again? But every time we talk to a coach or a player, it's always about 16, 17 games. You're going to need to play more depth. He's like the top depth at 3 different spots. So yeah, you're going to see a bunch of him. And we have in previous years, Kerry Combs used to love having a 3-corner rotation, but there had to be three guys who were about the same level. You didn't want to take an A+ guy off the field and put a B+ guy in there. If you were in a close fourth quarter with Penn State or something like that, it was really dependent on, were these guys kind of comparable players? Mathews is really, the bar is pretty high in that Ohio State corner room. Davis Ignosin is very good. Denzel Burke is very good. And Mathews feels like he's working his way up to the spot, to the point where he's, in that conversation to maybe they do bring back a kind of true 3-corner rotation. And if they do, he's going to be that guy. And if Denzel Burke had left for the NFL after last season, I'm looking at Davis Ignosin and Jermaine Mathews as the two outside corners and going, zero concerns, like no concerns at all. Jermaine Mathews feels like, he's a little behind where you traditionally expect that 3-year pathway for like the Jeff Okudah kind of career, where, okay, you're playing a little bit, you're playing a bigger role by the end of your freshman year. You're pretty good your sophomore year. You're an all Big Ten, All-American caliber corner your third year, and then boom, you're off to the NFL as a first-round draft pick. Jermaine Mathews feels like he's behind that, but it's just because of how talented the guys ahead of him are. I would still expect him to be, when Ignosin and Burke leave after this year, assuming they both do leave after this year, Mathews feels like he's just, he'll be that next guy who we're, seeing on NFL draft boards a year from now.
Yeah, 1 year as a starter, full-time starter probably, and then off to the NFL.
And so let's go. I'm just going to stay in the corner room here because there's a lot of stock risers on the defense, which is, that's very good news on a defense where, the top level talent is so good all over the place. They got so many guys back that a lot of these guys, we're really talking about guys who are luxuries. But Calvin Simpson-Hunt, to me, the other outside corner who's with the twos right now, he's right in that conversation as well. When you look at some of the guys who transferred after last year, Ryan Turner transferred, Jair Brown transferred. Jair Brown started a game as a true freshman in 2022. Calvin Simpson-Hunt very clearly jumped him on the depth chart by the end of the 2023 season, and then now Brown is down at LSU. You just saw more of it from Hunt this spring. You're going up against good wide receivers in practice every day. There are no days off. We saw Jermaine Mathews covering J.J. Smith. We saw Calvin Simpson-Hunt occasionally matched up with J.J. Smith. You are not getting, easy days in the Ohio State cornerback room. And he seemed like he was up to the task. He's probably a half a step behind Jermaine Mathews right now. And he came in last summer and Jermaine Mathews was in last spring. That makes a big difference at this point in your career. But you look at Calvin Simpson-Hunt, and it's, if he's a half step behind Jermaine Mathews, he seems like he could be another guy who might be on that same kind of basic path, 3 years or 4 years, and then boom off to the NFL relatively early in the draft. He's got the speed. They like him. I think they like the technique. They like all, they think they like just about everything about him. And it's just kind of, okay, just keep refining your game. But we saw big improvement again this spring. What we saw this spring looked pretty good out of him. So I think he's pretty clearly on this list as well.
Yeah, you mentioned he's a step behind Jermaine Mathews, but what Calvin Simpson does have is really good catch-up speed. And he's another guy that did not have, as you said, didn't have a spring. This is his first spring as a Buckeye, as a redshirt freshman. And we've seen clips of him giving up catches to J.J. Smith in spring practice. And it's like, but if you look, the coverage is right there. It's just one freak making a catch over a cornerback who is right there to make the play. And I think people are very high on Calvin Simpson-Hunt. And I would expect him to be one of the two starters at cornerback next year with Jermaine Mathews. And I think it's going to be a fun tandem to watch when those two get going. Should I stay in the secondary or should I move down some? I feel like we'll come back to the secondary. I'm going to go with Mitchell Melton, who 5th-year senior is the number 4, number 5 defensive end, could factor in the jack role. I just think this is the last opportunity for Ohio State to play him, and it's his last opportunity to earn that playing time. So when I see him in the spring, there are times where he looks absolutely like the fastest, the quickest of the defensive ends. There are times where he gets around the defensive or the offensive tackle so quickly. And when you look at this wide swatch of football players that Ohio State has, talented defenders that they have, you've got to find ways to get those guys on the field. And I think watching Mitchell Melton, he's one of those guys that they have to get there. And we haven't seen the jack. Jim Knowles says they still have it. But I think I think he can play defensive end. And he's a guy that is a veteran. He's been around. He's been healthy enough now. So it's like, let's get him involved. And I think just from watching him this spring, we talked about these 4 defensive ends, and we would maybe mention Mitchell Melton. I think based on what I saw this spring, I think it's time to start mentioning him as a guy. I don't know how much he's going to play, because I feel like we see the plans for so much playing time for so many people, but then when the games start happening, the assistant coaches just don't pull the trigger. But these non-conference games are so bad. If you're not playing your depth in those games, you're never going to play it.
Yeah, it does feel like, I'm sure that's been, as much as that's been drummed into our heads, the importance of them playing depth this year, I'm sure that's gotten drummed into their heads as well. That's typically when we hear the same thing from coaches, whether it's a specific message or a specific point of emphasis during a game, that's how we know, this is what they're talking about inside the meeting rooms during the week. With as often as we've heard that this spring, I'm sure that's been a big point of emphasis to the assistant coaches. So I would guess we are going to see a deeper rotation. And he's someone who is on that list, like you said, of guys who you've been hearing about for a while, and it just hasn't translated to the field. And 2 years ago, it was because of a knee injury, and he missed the whole season. Last year, they just didn't play the depth as much as you maybe were thinking they would this time of year. This year, what we saw out of him was very impressive. It feels like he is a very, very much a viable piece in that defensive end rotation, and it's just a matter of how deep are they going to go, and are they going to use guys in different situations? Are they going to be situational pass rushers, or guys who they're going to play the rushman package, or we really haven't heard a lot about the jack this spring. Is that going to be something they bring back? But it feels like whatever it is, there is real legitimate opportunity for him to be part of that somewhere. All right, next up. Oh, let's see, where to go. Let's go back to the secondary. How about Jaden Bonsu? Jaden Bonsu, safety, really didn't play a whole heck of a lot last year. I might not have played at all. He really was not. I think he missed some time with injury. This spring, there was plenty of opportunities because you had guys who were out. Malik Hartford was out. Lathan Ransom was really limited. So there were snaps available in that secondary, and Jaden Bonsu really felt like he made the most of it. We saw him out there a lot more than I was expecting, and he feels like he is in a spot where he's working himself potentially into being at least a kind of rotational or solid number 2 kind of player potentially for them this year. He was not someone that I would have had on my list at the beginning of spring, but this is one of these opportunities opportunity only knocks once. It knocked for him this spring, and it felt like he made the most of those opportunities.
Yeah. We knew Lathan Ransom probably wasn't going to be full go, and then Jihad Carter dealing with whatever he's dealing with. And Jaden Bonsu, like you said, we wouldn't, if it's a guy that you wouldn't have had, or you wouldn't have even thought about before the spring, and it's somebody you're now talking about and is running with the ones, it catches your attention, and it can only be stock up. I think it's interesting with him, he's listed at 6'2", 207. And prior to this spring, I didn't really know exactly what he was going to be. He's one of those guys that you could put into a bucket of, he might grow into a linebacker. And is he already so big that he can't handle being a safety? So I think those questions needed to be answered, and maybe some of those questions were answered, and whether it was in the affirmative or the negative, we probably don't know entirely yet. But the fact that he got so much time, and we didn't see him getting toasted or roasted or burnt when we were watching him. He looked like he belonged out there. Big kid. And now you could probably say, well, looks like a bright future, or at least a future. Because when you don't play at all as a true freshman, you don't know if this guy's just going to drift off into the sunset. We saw Cedric Hawkins didn't play at all as a true freshman last year at safety for Ohio State. Didn't even know, what safety position does he even play? Is he a nickel? And then now he's in the portal. Jaden Bonsu, we got a good look this spring, and patrolling the skies at strong safety for the Buckeyes. And I'm interested to see if he is the number 2 this season. Like, can Jahad Carter hold him off? If he can move past a fifth-year senior, assuming that fifth-year senior is still here, if he can move past a fifth-year senior, I think that would be a pretty interesting development for sure for him.
Yeah, it feels like he is trending up, in terms of playing time, trending up in terms of where he probably is on that depth chart. We'll see. Jahad Carter is kind of a little bit of a mystery at this point because he didn't play as much as you expected last year and then was seemingly injured at the end of spring practice this year. So you don't really have a great sense for where things stand with him, but it feels like if he's not able to go this fall for whatever reason, whether it's transfer or injury or whatever, they feel like they might be in pretty decent shape with Jaden Bonsu.
I feel like I just need to. I've talked more about Jalen McClain more than anybody else on the Ohio State beat this spring. So I guess I will just continue that. And freshman free safety Jalen McClain, I'm going to go ahead and put here as a stock riser. Everybody saw him in the spring game not take an interception back for a touchdown, but grab an interception, somehow get tackled by an offensive lineman, quote unquote tackled, but was an instance of where you saw what the coaches have talked about was his ability to find the football. And that hasn't always meant finding the football in the air. That's not a Malik Hooker type of finding the football. It's just getting to the football, running to the football, tackling the football, just being part of the play. And that's something that he has excelled at this spring and has also been boosted by the fact that Malik Hartford has been out. So Jalen McClain has been running with the twos all from day one in spring practice. He was ahead of Cedric Hawkins as a true freshman coming into your spring. When you've already moved past somebody who has been here before, that's a pretty good sign. And I've talked about on here before that first day, watching him just at free safety, pointing guys out, telling a walk-on, you need to be over here, directing traffic, which I think is pretty high level stuff for your first spring practice and just having that kind of ability. And then the effort has never been an issue there as well. So I would put him on there. I don't know what that entails for this year. I would assume he's going to redshirt because, like I said, Malik Hartford is there as well. But I'm also interested, is redshirting, is there a chance that redshirting is going to go away? With this kind of schedule, and it's like, look, we'd love to have you here for 5 years, but we can't promise that, that sort of thing where like, we can't promise that you're not going to play 5 games this year.
Yeah. I don't want to completely derail the show with on this whole topic, but it does feel like the combination of the longer schedule, the transfer portal, the odds of a guy playing 5 years at Ohio State to the point where Ohio State 5 years from now is like, thank goodness we have this guy. We have no one better than this guy 5 years from now. He's going to definitely start and be a really crucial player for us outside of like the really developmental positions like the offensive line, maybe defensive tackle. I think that is kind of going away. Like, I don't know that there's a point to Ohio State ever redshirting a quarterback ever again. It feels like if you're at Ohio State as a 5th-year quarterback, you should have been recruited over 3 times over probably at that point. That's probably true in the safety room as well. So I don't think you're going to see nearly as many redshirts as you did, but I don't want to completely derail us.
Yeah.
Back
That's
to Jalen
McClain. For another time.
Yeah, that's a great show for 3 weeks from now when we're going, what are we going to talk about? So back to Jalen McClain. He was out there, like you said, day one, and never looked out of place. I don't remember seeing like the really screamingly obvious, like, oh yeah, there's a true freshman who should still be in high school in the hot lunch line in the Chip Kelly parlance. He never looked like wildly out of place, which as a spring of your true freshman year, that's really impressive. You don't want to play a true freshman at safety, even a really talented one. There is the Caleb Downs, and then unless you are literally Caleb Downs, that generally does not go very well. And I don't think Jalen McClain is literally Caleb Downs, but I do think he could be pretty darn good in a year or two. So I think this is a little bit more of a just file this one away. You may see him, you'll probably see him more than you would have expected at the beginning of the spring during this season, probably in fourth quarter of games and, the second half of the Akron game and stuff like that. You'll probably see more of him than you would have expected 2 months ago, which then makes him a stock up guy to me. Okay, Tony,
Real quick,
go ahead.
I'll just throw in on, it's very similar to Kai Stokes, his freshman spring.
Mhm.
So we know how that ended, where he lost his mojo at some point, didn't get any playing time, and then transferred out. So it'll be important for Jalen McLean to keep this momentum, because he's got a sophomore starting ahead of him in Caleb Downs, and a sophomore that is also ahead of him in Malik Hartford. Hartford could play either safety, and perhaps McLean can as well. It's important to keep the momentum and build on it, rather than be like, I'm never going to play here because of the guys ahead of me.
Right. Yeah. I think you have to take a little bit of a longer view. And I would assume when you're coming to a place like Ohio State, you sort of understand, yes, there are other really good football players here. And I'm not necessarily, when a Caleb Downs is on campus, I'm not necessarily going to step on the field and be the starter year one. And Malik Hartford was pretty darn good last fall and feels like he's sort of on track to be a pretty good player for Ohio State as well. So it is not the clearest path to the playing field, but there is definitely a path there, and a much clearer path to some kind of playing time this fall than I would have guessed at the beginning of the spring. So that's, that is a positive news for him. Let's see. How about someone else, Tony? Let's go back to the defensive line. How about Edric Houston? Edric Houston came in as, 5-star prospect. Mark Givler talked about him as the best player he had seen in the class at one point when he saw him in person down in Georgia. He was the subject of some early signing day drama. That was one of two guys that was we got to watch Ryan Day process the news in real time during the early signing day press conference, and they did get both of those guys. And much like the other one, JJ Smith, Edric Houston seems like he's on track to probably do some impressive stuff. Probably not as big a part of this fall's team as JJ Smith is going to be, but already, Tony, you saw he came in, he's bigger than a lot of your typical defensive ends. A lot of the defensive ends come in at 240 pounds or something like that. He's coming in at like 270. So you knew he was probably going to be a little bit more college ready than some of the other guys that they've had at those positions over the years. And he looked pretty college ready. And he's running with threes. So, he's not going up against the first team offensive line all that often. But he did to the third team offensive line or the second team offensive line exactly what you would have thought someone with that kind of pedigree was going to do. Looked very impressive. I think they only credited him with 1 sack in the spring game. I thought he had 2. Maybe it was, one was 1 yard over the line of scrimmage or something like that. But good, disruptive. That's a spot where, you've got for at least 6 guys ahead of him probably this year. But that's okay. Like there is going to be work to be done for him this year. And then as some of those older guys, as JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer head off to the NFL, there is going to be a much bigger role for Edric Houston moving forward. But, I think he's a little bit stock up. He was someone where the stock was pretty high already, but what you saw this spring was kind of, okay, not only is he this guy, he could be this guy maybe a little sooner than we might have thought.
Yeah, and I would agree. And he's probably battling with Joshua Mickens to be the number 6 guy right now. And it'd be a tough ask to move ahead of Mitchell Melton or Kenyatta Jackson or Caden Curry at this point. And I think that's one of the reasons why he is stock up, because you get him here and it's like there are 5 guys who are upperclassmen ahead of you. So you're kind of just in the background a little bit, but he's a guy that on the field doesn't really stay in the background for long. And I could see him making some waves the first 3 games of this season when there are plays to be made against lesser opponents. And I'm currently writing about Edric Houston right now. It should be up on BuckeyeHuddle.com at some point on Thursday. Had a long conversation with Buford High School head coach Brian Appling about Edric a while back. Finally getting all of that written up. So you can check that out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, how about a thumbs up? Look at me, being professional. Thumbs up on that. And if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please do so there. I could stay on the defensive line, Tom, if you want. And we can go with Jason Moore, redshirt freshman defensive tackle, who stuck out the first time we talked to Larry Johnson at some point this spring, because I think he mentioned Jason Moore's name no fewer than 3 or 4 times, and was just, hey, how are things on the interior? And he'd be like, well, Jason Moore's had a strong off season. He's gotten bigger, gotten stronger, this, and that. And he is a guy that they need him to be somebody that can spell Tyleik Williams. You can't have Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton playing so many snaps as they did last year. You need Hero Canoe. You need Jason Moore. You need Caden McDonald to come in, and Taiwan Malone to give them rest. And I think watching Jason Moore, who in the spring game had some good moments, was able to do some twists and come around the edge and chase the quarterback down as a defensive tackle. That's pretty impressive. So I would put him on there. We'll see what he can do this year. I know high school All-American, same high school as Chase Young, all of these different things. Didn't really play last year. Has an opportunity to play a lot this season.
Yeah, the same high school as Chase Young thing always invites the really irresponsible comps. And you got to kind of keep in mind, like, yeah, lots of people have gone to that high school. They didn't all turn out to be Chase Young. But he was someone who, coming out of high school, there were a lot of folks in the evaluation business who liked him a lot as a prospect. And then he was banged up a lot last year. I was thinking he might be someone who could come in and be, a little bit more of an immediate impact guy, not starting as a true freshman by any means, but someone who might be able to get some fourth quarter minutes and all that kind of stuff. And he was just banged up last fall, and so that didn't really happen. This spring, it felt like, okay, kind of back on track to what I was sort of expecting based on where he was coming out of high school. So yeah, I think that's a good one. Oh, let's see. How about let's go with another guy who, we heard lots of good stuff lots of good stuff about coming out of high school. Someone you actually got to watch play in high school, Caden Curry. He's another someone, he's someone who, in the world where JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer both turned pro, Caden Curry is, the next big thing at defensive end. And we've been talking about him for a while. You watched him play high school ball back in 2020. That was during the weird period where Ohio high school wasn't playing, but Indiana high school was. So that has been a minute. He's been at Ohio State longer than you think. And he's been kind of biding his time and taking on a little bit of a bigger role every year behind JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. But based on what we saw this spring, it feels like he's really ready. Like, he probably would have been ready to take on that full starting role this spring had those guys left, or if someone gets hurt this fall. It doesn't feel like there's going to be a massive drop off there. He has been, someone that the coaching staff has really liked. Going back to high school, always heard good things about him, his ability, his makeup, work ethic, all that kind of stuff. And just watching this spring, you sort of saw it. You got a chance to see it because they didn't play the older guys quite as much. The guys with 1,000 reps didn't play quite as much. So he had lots of opportunities. It felt like he made the most of them. And, again, I don't think the numbers are going to be enormous. I don't think this is a 10 sack season for him or anything like that based on just the number of snaps he's going to get. But when he's in there, everything I saw this spring made me think he is going to be productive when he's in there.
2 career sacks, Tom. So I'll set the over-under on sacks for Caden Curry this year at 2.5.
I'll take the over on that. I think he's going to play. You go back to like the Notre Dame game last year, and it was just JT Tuimoloau out and Jack Sawyer out on the field. Like, very clearly, in a big moment, Larry Johnson did not have a ton of faith in Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson. At this point, I think when they go to Oregon, I am expecting Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson to be out there and playing meaningful snaps in the next version of that big game, kind of at the same basic point of the season.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I expect them to play quite a bit. And he's a guy that both him and Kenyatta Jackson have been gearing up for this. And so Caden Curry is a guy that has flashed at times and now will be able to play a more sustained role and won't just be flashing. He'll be playing and rotating in. And really, that's when a defensive line is at its best, when guys are just in and out. You can't really tell a difference from one player to the next because they're all being very productive. And I think that's what we will see from him this year. So That is the 8. I also had Lorenzo Styles Jr. I thought developed, and he missed, I don't know, the last week or so of spring practice. Ryan Day said he had a procedure done. I do know that when we saw them, I think it was maybe Student Appreciation Day, he was locking guys down. Like he had coverage tight in the slot at that nickel spot. And so he's continued to develop there. And I could also throw CJ Hicks in here, who stayed with the ones the entire time. I guess that shouldn't be a huge surprise since Sonny Styles is still learning it, but he didn't look out of his element. And for me, maybe the most interesting aspect of this is Jim Knowles got to look at CJ Hicks for a prolonged period of time, not unlike looking at Sonny Styles for a prolonged period of time in 2023 and figuring out what are the best ways to use him, what are the best ways to keep him out of trouble. And so they got more information there. So I would say, some stock up there as well.
Yeah, I had CJ Hicks on my list as well, and Lorenzo Styles is a great shout as well. I kind of left him off just because I hadn't thought about him because I was thinking about through the spring game, and I was like, oh well, we didn't get to see him in the spring game, and Ryan Day did make that sound like that was a relatively minor thing. The way you were talking about CJ Hicks, it reminded me of Chip Kelly talking about how the coach's job is to find out what these guys do well and put them in a position to do that. And it does feel like they have really sort of started to figure that out with CJ Hicks, where we saw him making plays. We saw him being really disruptive in the backfield. You've known the athleticism was there since day one. He was a 5-star prospect coming out of Kettering Alter. And, I think he's someone who people are going, why has he not played? Is he a bust? What's wrong with him? Is he broken? Is he terrible? What's wrong? Something must be wrong. He hasn't played. And it's like, well, they've had really good veteran linebackers for the last couple of years, and they only play 2 linebackers at a time most of the time. So the path to the field has been pretty clogged up. Now, this is the point where you'd think, okay, if it's going to happen, this is when it's going to happen. The spots are open. There's a path to the playing field. Can he seize it? And I came out of spring thinking, yeah, I think we saw from CJ Hicks what you needed to see out of CJ Hicks to think that CJ Hicks is going to be a significant piece of this fall's Ohio State team. The only other name I had on my list was Aaron Scott, and we have been very secondary heavy on this show. Aaron Scott played, I believe, the most snaps of anyone on the defensive side of the ball in the spring game. He's not someone who's going to be starting this year, barring a biblical plague of injuries. He's not someone who's probably going to be playing a ton during the first halves of games this year, but we've talked about the trajectory of the guys who end up being pretty darn good before all is said and done. And you saw some of that stuff out of him this spring. Still a long way to go. Still lots of hurdles to get through. You gotta stay focused. You gotta stay on your P's and Q's, as they say. But you've seen some of the early flashes from him where, maybe by the end of the year, he's getting some second half play and getting some reps later in the year. And then next year, as potentially a couple of guys leave and some spots open up, maybe he's, playing a much bigger role on next year's team. Would have liked to see Bryce West this spring. He was banged up and really didn't play a whole heck of a lot. But, I think both of those guys, and Miles Lockhart too. Miles Lockhart had some good moments. Like the cornerback room, you have seen the recruiting out of Tim Walton. You have seen the development out of Tim Walton. And I think now we've gone through literally every corner on the roster and said stock up this spring, which, that is a pretty good validation, not only of those guys, but also of Tim Walton.
Yeah, and I think Aaron Scott was also helped by Jermaine Mathews going to the nickel and allowing him to move into the 2s and getting a bunch of work. So there's 10 or 12 names for you that are stock up, which, Tom, means that there's 30 other guys that are stock down. And that's just too bad for this Ohio State defense. I don't know what they're going to do. Now, just because we didn't mention anybody, that does not mean stock down, Tom, unless you would like to throw some stock downs on us right now. Who should be gone from the team, Tom?
Yeah, I think I can't think of anyone off the top of my head other than guys who just missed time with injuries, which it's like, well, that's too bad. But yeah, I don't think there was anyone that I thought, oh boy, I thought this guy was going to be a regular, and oh boy, this is just not going to work out. Which that's good. That's what you're looking for. This is supposed to be a time of year when there's some optimism around the program, and it feels like the team has given the fan base plenty of reasons for optimism.
Yep, for sure. So that will do it for us here. I want to thank you all for tuning in. As always, Like I said, if you could go ahead and hit the thumbs up if you have not done so, we would appreciate that if you're watching on YouTube. As always, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Sign up. It is the best way to support what we do. We'd appreciate seeing you there on the message board as well. So that will do it. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.